All right, in this lesson, we're going to dive into the Sprite class, which is a really useful feature of Pygame. And so we're going to do so by just adding a player ship to our game. At the end of this lesson, all we're going to have is a ship drawn on the screen. It's not going to move or shoot or anything like that yet. Really just want to get everyone used to the syntax. Also, since most of us are very new programmers, it may look a little bit confusing at first. Don't worry. None of this syntax is anything that we ought to memorize. It's right now, I think it's good enough if you can read it and understand the purpose of different blocks of code. And then as you want to do different things with it, right, we're going to do a lot of copy and paste and modifying. All right. But, all of this stuff with Pygame is not what I would consider anything that's important to memorize. Okay. And so, it's okay if at the end of this lesson you're not quite sure what's going on everywhere, as long as everything works. I think as we get into future lessons, and you see how the whole game is structured overall, things will start to click and make some sense as to why the syntax is the way that it is. So I'm going to get out of the way and let's dive in. All right, so let's see. So I have my game open in Pygame here, or in idle, and let me make the font just a touch bigger, make it a little bit easier if you're watching on video. Okay, and so one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to load the image for our ship. And so, all right, so I've got a place for that. And so I'm going to load my ship image. And as you go through this video, what I would do is just type as I go along, and I'm going to go faster than you can type probably, but there's going to be plenty of points in the video where you can just pause. So the ship image, the syntax for this is pygame.image.load. And now we need the path to our image. And so I'm going to look at, it's inside my assets folder, and it's inside my image folder. And the file name is playership.png. And if you're on a Windows computer, it is not case sensitive, but if you want to do this on a Mac, or then the file system is case sensitive. So make sure you match the capitalization of the folder names and the file names when you do this. So the path is going to be assets, images, it's playership.png. All right, and then we have one more thing to do. All right, this is a PNG image, and it is not a PNG is not a format that Pygame can draw really, really quickly. All right, especially if we have dozens or of images or hundreds of images in our game at once. So we're going to convert it to a pixel format that Pygame can handle quickly. And there are two ways to do this. One is convert, but I am going to use convert alpha. And that's because my image has, right, it's going to be on a black background, and I don't want it to show up as like a white box around my image. And so alpha, right, this image actually has transparent portions to it. So all of the areas around the edges of the image are transparent. And so convert alpha will preserve that transparency. All right, so now we have the image loaded. The next thing we're going to do is make a class for our ship. And so this is the place where the syntax will look a little weird at first. All right, so we're going to make a class for a ship. And then just like before when we did object-oriented stuff, we had an initializer. And then this is where we had to think about, this is where the initializer is where we specify what attributes the ship is going to have. And So in order to, before we get into what attributes it has, we have to apply some extra code from the Pygame library. So when we make a class, sometimes we have parentheses here. There's no parentheses, or sometimes we have parentheses that are empty. We can also add a reference to another class inside of this, and Pygame has all right, as part of the Pygame library, there is a sprite class. And a sprite is just an image in a video game. But the sprite class in Pygame has a lot of code in it to do stuff like collision detection, and drawing and movement and things like precise positioning and things like that. And so when I put this reference to the sprite class inside the parentheses after my ship class declaration, what I did is my ship class now has all of the functions that the sprite class has, plus any additional features that I decide to add. All right. And so there's one more thing I need to do when I extend a class like this, right? And that is the sprite class has its own initializer, and we need to run that to get it set up properly in the computer's memory. So it's the line we use is super, and it'll be 2 underscores in it, and its parentheses. Okay, and so now what we did is we made a ship class, and we inherited all of the features from the sprite class, so we don't have to recode those ourselves. Okay, so we can just use code from the sprite class, and we'll start exploring that code later. All right, so the next thing to think about is what attributes might a ship have? And I'm going to give my ship an X and Y coordinate, and I'm going to have an image. Right, so these are the things that eventually our ship will have, like a shield strength and maybe, different abilities like power-ups and stuff like that. But for now, we just want to draw it. So we need to know its location and then the image we're going to use, which will be this one. And so now we have to assign these these attributes, or store these attributes. So I'm going to say self.x equals x, self.y equals y, and oops, not going to do that. I'm going to start out with self, forgot about rectangles, self.image equals image. And then in Pygame, everything is rectangle based. So when we are thinking about where the position of our ship, what we're actually going to be thinking about is, the position of the rectangle that surrounds the ship. And so I'm going to say self.rect is equal to self.image.get rect. Okay, so what this does is it looks at the image and it figures out the dimensions of the rectangle that surrounds it, and it stores a reference to that rectangle for us. And then we need to think about where we want to position that rectangle on the screen. So I'm just going to let this X and Y be the center. I'm going to define that as what I want the center of my ship to be. So I'm just going to say self.rect.center equals X, Y. Right, and this is my ship. So this is my ship class. It can't do anything yet, but there's enough to draw it. All right. So pause the video if you need to get this typed, and then we'll move on to the setup. Okay. So in the setup function, or in the setup section, this is, when the game kicks off, this is going to be where, where is the ship going to start? Where are all the enemies going to be? You set the score to 0, maybe decide what power-ups we're going to do and when they're going to fall, stuff like that. So for now, I just want to define, I just want to think about where I want my ship to be positioned when the game starts, and to actually create an instance of a ship, and then we'll get it drawn. So I'm going to, like have my ship's starting position just be the the center of the screen. And so we have a width variable up here. And so I'm just going to make my starting position the width divided by 2. And that way, if, I like using the variable width here instead of just hard coding a number right here, because if I change the dimensions of my screen, this position will get fixed, without me having to update the code in more than one place. All right, and then the start Y. Right, my screen has a height as well, and I don't want the Y position to be exactly the height of the screen, because then it'll be like hanging halfway off the screen a little bit. So I'm just going to subtract a little bit. Right, there is nothing special about this 100 number here. I'm just going to say I want the starting Y position to be, the height of the screen, pixels down, and then minus 100 to nudge it back up a little bit. If I don't like the position, when I draw, then I will just change this number, make it bigger or make it smaller, and it'll move the image down, make it bigger, it'll pull the image up a little bit. So this is just a guess until it looks right. All right. And so now let's make a ship object. So we'll make our ship, and class name is capital letter. And the little variable holding an instance of it, I'm going to do that lowercase letters. Pay careful attention to the cases when you do, when we're doing the code here. So variables will begin with lowercase letters. Classes will always begin with uppercase letters. And the ship is expecting an X and a Y and an image. So we'll use the start X and start Y variables that we calculated here. And the image, when we loaded our ship image, we called it ship image. And so now we have an instance of the ship in the computer's memory. Okay. So this is an individual sprite, and sprites can also be put into groups. So Pygame has another class called the sprite group. And so we're going to take our ship and put it into a group. And it's going to seem a little bit weird right now. It's like, why are we putting one thing into a group? A group is basically going to be a list. But you'll see that the syntax for drawing things in Python is really, really simple when we do put things in groups. So this might look a little weird now, but as soon as we put in enemies and lasers and power-ups and stuff like that, this syntax will make a lot more sense. So I'm going to make a player, and Pygame sprite, and the class I want to create is a group single, which means this is a group that is only allowed to hold one item. So I suppose not really a group, is it? All right. And got the parentheses at the end here. But so this is really the same syntax here is, you do the variable and then the class you want to make and any values that go into it. In this case, this is more telling us how Pygame is organized on our computer. So there's the Pygame module that has a sprite folder, and inside the sprite folder, there is a class called group single in there. All right. And so now let's add the ship to the group. So I'm going to say player.add ship. Okay, so now we have a group that has the ship in it. And so getting it drawn is very, very simple. Go to the drawing code section, and you just do the name of the group and draw, and then where do you want to draw it, and right, our surface that we created at the beginning of the game, right, we called it screen, kind of traditional in Pygames called screen. So we'll draw it on the screen, and let's run it. And there we go. And we got ship on the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to end this video here, and you can, scrub through it, pause, get everything all typed out. When you finish, make sure you run it. Ship shows up on the screen. And in order to get credit for this assignment, just about take a little picture, you take a screenshot that shows maybe a little bit of your code open and a Pygame window that actually has a ship, right, drawn on it, right? And one more tip as you go through this, right, go slow. I think, the mistakes you're going to make are going to be like with the case of letters and opening and closing parentheses and tabbing and indentation, stuff like that. So, but I think if you go slow, this shouldn't be too difficult. All right. That's it for this lesson.